brave listeners to Wilhelm Presents Frightening Tales. I'm your host, Wilhelm. Tune in each week where I entertain my listeners with another dark and creepy tale of the paranormal, donated by authors from all over this world. If you are the author of some paranormal fiction and would like to share a story with my listeners, then submit one at frighteningtales.com. And while you're there, tune in for more than 120 episodes of previous content. It's hard to believe another season has come to a close, but another 26 episodes have been laid to rest. It's time for me to take a much-needed break and gather another 26 tales of horror for Season 6. So, please, continue to send your writing in for future programs. Today's episode is written by Dustin Ridout, the dad of two lovely but sometimes scary kids. He's a Colorado area physician and a lover of horror stories on cold, rainy nights. Here's his tale, Tiny. "You need to eat your vegetables secondhand, Timmy," said Steve Jenkins with a cruel laugh. He then walked around the long lunch table, whose surface reflected wood grain, as if the plastic surface could actually be made of wood. All these tables, exactly the same, lined up in columns to accommodate the student body for lunch. Sitting on a hard tile floor, neutral light, tan with painted brick walls to match. Steve was one of those kids that you hated instantly, but for some reason simultaneously wished he was your friend. His family was rich by Coopertown standards, but that didn't say much. As a small Texas town of a few thousand people, that didn't amount to much. As far as 7th graders go, he was almost a head taller than most of the class. He stood over me with an evil grin and then, without hesitation, flipped my entire tray of food onto my lap. It had to be chilly day. My t-shirt and jeans were smeared up and down with what looked like crap. He then exclaimed, "Check it out! Secondhand Timmy shit himself!" What followed was an uproar of laughter of most of the 7th grade. Mr. Smith, the portly lunch teacher who constantly had a slick sheen of oil on his face like a warm candle, raised an eyebrow and shouted, "Hey now, knock it off!" But the smirk on his fat, greasy face said he was enjoying the show, too. The lunch bell blasted starkly, signaling the end of lunch, and everyone hurriedly got up to go to class. Steve left me with a nod and said, "Have a nice afternoon, nerd. Let me know if you want a second helping," laughing to himself. I really couldn't argue with him. I was a nerd in the grandest sense of the word. I was short, skinny, and wore oversized glasses, and had no friends. Yes, a nerd. It didn't help that I was being raised by my absentee single mom, who works double shifts at the local grocery, and despite that, we don't have a pot to piss in, as my out-of-work alcoholic uncle, who lived with us, liked to say. My mom had to buy most of my clothes at the thrift store in town. Every once in a while, one of the students in my grade would recognize a shirt or pair of pants that their parents had donated to the store from their own worn-out wardrobe. Hence the nickname Second-Hand Timmy. When that happened, those were always bad days. filled to the brim with humiliation, but today had those beat for sure. I decided to cut the remainder of school. It was the last school day before summer break. It wasn't like I would be missed. I could disappear and hardly anyone would notice. I couldn't go to class like this anyway. I left the brick cafeteria and walked across the overgrown soccer field that was as much weeds as it was grass. I squeezed through a hole cut in the rusted chain-link fence that surrounded the school, often used by potheads to cut class, and I headed home. That was a long time ago, I thought to myself, as I sat back in a buttery, soft brown leather office chair. The chair let out a slight squeak as if to complain under the weight of my body. I was now 29, young for a person in my position within the company, but despite my youth, I managed to have a slight, premature graying of my hair at the temples. The remainder of my hair was dark brown and combed back. I now wear only tailored suits and have traded my glasses for contacts. At 6 foot tall, I think most would call me handsome. My old classmates, I'm sure, would have a difficult time even recognizing me. My boss turned toward me, standing in front of my office desk. "Second-hand Timmy? That's a good one," my boss laughed. "I hope there's a point to this story, Tim. I don't have time to hear about your whole sad life. I've got a date with my new secretary," Todd said, impatiently, with a wink. My boss, Todd Winston, was the #1 man at Mountain Oil and Gas. He was also married and had had more than one sexual harassment lawsuit filed against him just this year. He held a diamond-cut crystal glass half full of deep Auburn scotch in his hand and took a deep drink. A small amount spilled down his chin onto the hand-knotted, imported rug that lay in the center of my modern office. He turned away from me and gazed out of my office windows, tinted from ceiling to floor. From the 45th floor, the lighted city laid out before him. The view was good, but as the #2 man in the company, my view was not as good as the top floor. That was his office, and he always liked to remind me of this. "Well, Mr. Winston, I thought you wanted to know why I keep an ant farm on my office desk." "I know it's a bit unusual," I said. I truly hate this man, and not just because he stands between me and the top position at this multi-billion-dollar company. He was piggish, with no morality, obtaining his position by destroying lives and the environment. He got his position with the help of his family, which happens to be very politically influential, as well as incredibly wealthy. He turned his back to me and sat in the deep leather chair opposite me and examined my desk with distaste. It was a simple desk, clean but weathered oak, unremarkable but for a custom-made ant farm, made of 2 panes of glass held together by a custom-made gold metal bracket. Between the 2 panes of glass was white sand, layered to a couple inches from the top, in which a large colony of ants diligently worked away, creating room after room, connected by small winding passages. I gazed distantly at it for a few seconds and then continued my story. I walked along the sad 2-lane street of Coopertown towards my home. Downtown Coopertown was small and had the usual buildings you might find in a small town. half of which were empty storefronts, a post office with an attached sheriff's station, a small pub appropriately called the Trough, where the floor's grime was matched only by the grime of the few patrons hunched over the bar like so many vultures over a dead carcass. A small library, all boring. All save one. Sal's Exotic Pets. Sal's opened last year. Too much excitement. Going there was almost like going to the zoo. I would spend hours there just looking at the exotic spiders and snakes. Once in a while, Sal would let me drop a live mouse into a cage and watch as it was devoured by a snake or other carnivorous creature. Pure entertainment in such a boring town, but sadly, of course, the shop was already going out of business. As I walked past, I looked inside. The front window was dusty and heat radiated from the concrete sidewalk out front. There was large going out of business signs in the window, but I could just see inside. A couple boxes could be seen on the ground in front of the counter. There was really not much left in the shop. Dust looked like it covered everything, like a thin veil. I wiped the glass to get a better look inside. It looked deserted. I grasped the hot brass handle of the door and pushed. I was a little surprised when the door swung open with a high-pitched tinkling of a bell hanging from the back of the door, meant to alert the owner a customer had just entered the shop. But no one stood behind the counter. No one was there to greet me at all. Just the dusty boxes and a few cracked and broken aquariums that used to house various critters. Inside seemed even hotter, if that was possible. A musty humidity hung in the air like an old, wet basement. It smelled of stale animal urine and feces, and something else. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. One smaller box sat directly on the counter. I figured anything left behind was finders keepers. On the side of the box, in large cursive red letters, was written, "One-of-a-kind alien ant farm. Amaze your friends," it exclaimed. The box itself looked like it had been opened and moth-eaten, with ragged holes around its edges. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands to read the back when I noticed sticking out from behind the counter was a pair of boots. Sal's boots. I edged slowly around the counter. The rest of his body came into view. I gasped. What remained of his clothes were in tatters, exposing white bones beneath. But for the strips of cloth and boots, he looked just like the skeleton in Mr. Erickson's science class. I could just make out a tag on his shirt that said, "Hi, I'm Sal. How can I help?" The black eye sockets looked straight through me, and his face was frozen in a skeletal smile. As I stood there, a large black insect emerged from Sal's left ear hole and re-entered through his left eye socket. At that point, I did what any kid would do in the same situation. I screamed and ran, half expecting Sal to get up and chase after me. I could hear the door ding behind me as it slammed shut. The outside heat hit like a wall. My feet were pumping away like pistons. I expected at any time his brittle hands to reach around my neck from behind. As I blasted across the street, a car blared its horn at me, missing me by inches. I didn't stop until I was standing sweaty in front of my house, my heart pounding in my chest. Only then did I look down at my shaking hands to see the ant farm still in my grasp. My home is what you would call a fixer-upper. The yard was in disrepair, grass was dead, shrubs overgrown. The house itself had peeling paint exposing weathered wood siding and foggy, dusty windows. As if this wasn't bad enough, the home was infested from top to bottom with mice. I opened the door quietly and walked past the kitchen and the living room, trying not to disturb my uncle. I peeked into the living room, and there he was in all his glory, my uncle, sitting deep in the worn plaid fabric of an old easy chair in front of the TV. He was passed out with a bottle of cheap bourbon sitting next to him in the chair like an old friend. His t-shirt was a dirty off-white, almost yellow, with a grimy ring around the neck. The armpits were also a sickly yellow and stained with sour sweat. I could smell his acrid breath from the entryway, a mixture of decaying teeth and hangover. I knew to move as silently as a cat, lest I wake him from his boozy slumber. Just then he shifted in the chair, dislodging the bottle from its sitting place, dropping it to the floor with a clatter, spilling its bitter contents. Much less has resulted in a swift slap across my face, even if it was not my fault. "Oh, what the hell? You idiot boy," he mumbled. I thought he was going to get up and whip me within an inch of my life, but instead, he just rolled his head to the side and went back to sleep. I slunk up the creaky wooden staircase towards my room past a glue trap containing a slowly dying mouse, freshly caught. I went into my room and quietly closed my door. To some semblance of safety. Still shaken by seeing Sal's skeletal remains and wondering if somehow I could be blamed for Sal's death by my mere presence. I figured in a small town like Coopertown, his death would be big news, but a couple days later, the local news only posted a short but sad story of a poor storekeep who had probably committed suicide after his store went out of business, and his badly decomposed corpse was found by a realtor looking to lease the storefront. That was it. I looked down at the box I'd taken. A cartoonish picture of an oversized alien ant on the cover. A spark of excitement rose inside me. I rarely got toys or gifts for Christmas or birthdays or anything, so opening it was exciting, despite the pang of guilt that I had after technically stealing it from the exotic pet shop. I quickly changed out of my chili-stained clothes, lay on my bed, and opened the box. Mr. Winston sunk deeply into the leather chair, shifting a little, in many ways resembling my deadbeat uncle. Having had his third scotch, he was well on his way to getting drunk. "Wow, this is a long story, secondhand Timmy," slurring slightly. "I didn't have you pegged as a thief, but it wouldn't surprise me," interrupting the story. "You do have a shady reputation around here. The lucky way you find those oil deposits, not to mention how people who stand in your way of promotion seem to mysteriously disappear." He waved a hand like a drunk wizard performing some magic trick. "A couple board members, friends of my father's, told me I should watch my step around you. But I'm not afraid of the likes of you," punctuating the statement with another gulp of scotch. My rise within the company was meteoric in breadth and speed, due to the factors that he had mentioned, especially for a poor kid from a small town and broken home. It is True, I am gifted with the talent of finding large deposits of both oil and valuable minerals. And it is also true, a small number of strategic employee disappearances within the company have occurred, resulting in my quick advancement at Mountain Oil and Gas. But I assure you, all that was thoroughly investigated and thought not to be the result of any foul play. Todd looked at me, shifted again impatiently in the chair, wanting me to continue my yarn. The box was so worn, it literally split apart at the seams, spilling out onto my thin bedspread. The only contents, a plastic ant farm, an empty plastic container for the ants, and a piece of paper. I read the paper, which contained directions of how to set it up, how to add the ants to get the farm going, and feeding and care. I examined the ant farm. I was taken aback a little, as the farm already seemed to be up and running. Dirt in the lower 2/3 of the farm contained too many ants to be counted. They did seem a bit agitated, probably from the run home, so I set the farm on my old dresser. It was truly mesmerizing. They'd already formed multiple catacombs in the dirt with visible chambers. The ants themselves did not look like any ants I'd ever seen before, but maybe those jungle-dwelling ants that cut huge leaves down to small bits in a matter of minutes. They were large, about the size of one of those erasers you put at the end of a pencil. They had large mandibles as well, which made up about 1/3 of their overall length. But other than that, they looked like just big ants. Except one. In my mind, I already had him designated as the king of the colony. I called him Tiny, simply because he was big, and I thought it was a funny name. Tiny was a bit larger, but he was gray and had smaller pincers. He also had 3 red rings around his body, making him stand out. He seemed to watch me, or at least be aware. That night, my uncle continued to sleep with the blaring TV on. He may have gotten up to get more booze or go to the bathroom, but other than that, he really left me alone in my room. My mom was out of the house, pulling a night shift at the all-night grocery, so it was just me, Tiny, and the colony. I must have fallen asleep because I woke to a scratching sound next to my bed. I was not sure what time it was. I must have drifted off to sleep while watching Tiny direct his miniature army of ants. Down on the floor was another one of those disgusting glue mouse traps, with a terrified small mouse caught in its grips, like a prehistoric animal stuck in a tar pit. If I left it there, it would slowly, cruelly die of thirst and hunger. Just then, I heard a rhythmic tap, tap, tap from the direction of my dresser. I looked up, unable to immediately identify the source. Again, tap, tap, tap. I looked closer, and there, in the ant farm, was Tiny, tapping on the inside of the ant farm. How curious. Furthermore, he appears to be intently looking at the mouse in the trap, having some experience feeding animals, mice, as food at the shop before. I wondered, does he want to eat the mouse? It is a small mouse, but do ants eat mice? I grasped the mouse by the tail, and lifted him off the glue trap carefully and removed the top of the ant farm. I was not even sure that this small mouse would fit into the top of the farm, but as I lowered the mouse towards the top of the farm, Tiny appeared to direct the black ants into a mound that extended toward the mouse. When close enough, the black mandibles of the ants almost tore the mouse from my hand, forcing it down into the farm. The mouse was quickly torn into tiny pieces, at first squealing, but then being completely covered in black ants such that it was impossible to recognize it was a mouse at all. Even blood droplets that sprayed the inside of the clear plastic were sucked up by the ants as they broke the small animal to bits, either to be consumed or moved to lower areas within the catacombs of the farm, to be saved for later. I'd never seen such savage hunger. It reminded me of those stories of an unlucky cow wading into piranha-infested waters and being torn to bits in minutes. When the ants had finished, there was not a trace of the mouse. No fur, no bone, no blood, nothing. Tiny again tapped the plastic side expectantly. Tap, tap, tap. A bit louder than last time. I thought for a second, remembering the mouse in the hall, outside my room in the trap. I dropped this mouse into the farm as well. Immediately, it was torn limb from body in a barrage of moist clicking noises as the mouse was again devoured. No evidence of either mouse was visible, as if the mice had never existed at all. The following week was hot, even for Texas, and I spent most of my time with Tiny in the colony. Once in a while, I would notice one of my black colony ants shuffling along the footboard of the house carrying a tidbit it had picked up off the floor somewhere in the house. I'm not sure how they got out, but I was sure they were ants from my farm. Interestingly, our home's mouse infestation seemed to improve significantly. Although I had not fed the colony any more mice, I'm sure they had something to do with it. One hot night, my uncle's mood was particularly dour, and my mother was out again working at the grocery store. I was in my room, and I heard him yell up to me, "Timmy, get your ass down here." He was sitting in the easy chair. I could smell the alcohol in his thick breath immediately. "What the hell are you doing in your room all day? Why don't you go play outside like a normal kid?" I stepped closer to him, and I noticed one of my ants on the arm of the chair. "Those damn ants you brought into the house are all over the place," he slurred angrily. I thought I saw Tiny on the back of the chair near his head, so I stepped closer to see, worried he would be crushed or hurt by my angry uncle. As I stepped towards him, I knocked over a glass of bourbon that was sitting on the ground at his feet. Immediately, a blazing white blast of pain sped across my face as he brought his thick hand across my cheek with a crack. I fell to the floor in shock and pain at the angry reaction. My uncle moved to stand up, ready to give me another slap, yelling, "I'll teach you to kick over a man's drink." But just then, he paused, looking confusedly towards his feet. Two wide bands of black ants issued forth from small holes in the wall behind his chair. The ants had all but covered his feet, filling the room with excited, moist clicking. Before his eyes, the ants began tearing the flesh from his feet, within seconds exposing tendon and bone. He fell back into his chair. Sheer surprise and terror spread across his face. He opened his mouth to scream, but before any sound came out, A rope-like mass of ants issued from around the back of his chair, up his neck, blackening his face and filling his mouth. Only a muffled, unintelligible "brah" issued forth. He was now covered from foot to head with the insects. Like the mice, my uncle was being torn to tiny bite-sized pieces. I could now see the bone of his face, as the flesh of his eyes and cheeks were torn away by the facile work of the ants' razor-like mandibles. At this point, I noticed the writhing serpentine trail of ants had turned into a two-way street. The ants receding into the wall, each carrying a small red piece of meat that only seconds ago was part of my uncle, but not just pieces of meat. I saw fingernails and bits of bone. One industrious ant carried one of my uncle's teeth, freshly wrenched from his skull. I hid my head in horror and surprise, hoping that the same fate would not be mine. In mere minutes, my uncle's bones were all but gone, having been chipped and cut into minuscule grains and carted away. After a few more minutes, even the droplets of blood were cleared from the chair. The only remnants of my uncle were the sweaty groove left in the easy chair, and the glass with its spilt contents laying on its side on the ground. The TV continued to blare some reality show. I was alone. Sort of. Tap, tap, tap. I looked up to see Tiny go up on his hind legs, tap the easy chair, and then he retreated into the wall. I came to the realization, after what I had seen, that the colony was much bigger than I could have ever imagined, and that the colony extended far beyond the small plastic ant farm on my dresser, probably under the house foundation and maybe beyond. My fear dissolved as well into the understanding that Tiny and the colony were actually protecting me from my uncle, protecting me like a close family, like a family that I had never had. That night, I was shaky but calm after my experience and what I saw. I went to my room and Tiny was already back in the ant farm. He tapped 3 times as if to greet me and then went about his business with the colony, and I went to bed and slept. I dreamed of having millions of brothers and sisters and being loved and protected by each one. When my mom came home long enough to notice that my uncle was not in the house and had not been seen for some time, she called the police. A detective came to the house and asked me some questions, and I simply said I wasn't sure where he went. But the last time I saw him, he was very drunk. The detective scribbled a couple things down, and I never saw him again. There was no blood, no bones, no sign of a struggle. The police thought maybe he skipped town, or eventually may turn up if he needed money from my mom. Things in the house were much, much better without my uncle. Todd Winston again shifted in the leather chair. He was quite drunk now, but nonetheless there was an air of fear and disbelief in his eyes. He started to ask a question, raising a hand, but instead of acknowledging the gesture, I got up from my seat and refilled his crystal glass with the 15-year-old scotch he'd been drinking all evening. And I placed my index finger against my lips to signal for him to be quiet. So wrapped by the story was he that he hadn't noticed the presence of a few larger than normal black ants meandering on the armrest of his seat. So I continued the story. I would say the remainder of the summer was good. I spent my time with my newfound friends, but it was not all good. After all, I was still a 13-year-old nerd. I began carrying Tiny and a small portion of the colony in the ant farm with me wherever I went that summer. If my mother was around, she'd probably have wanted me to get some non-insect friends, but she wasn't. The ant farm would occasionally raise an eyebrow or result in a rare question here or there from the townsfolk. But otherwise, people really didn't notice things that are outside their own lives. A week or so before school was due to start up again, I was making my way back home from the library, where I had just checked out a book on insects of the Congo. The librarian there took great interest in the ant farm and helped me find the book. I decided to take a shortcut behind the trough today because it was so hot. I usually didn't like to take this route behind the bar because the smell of stale beer and vomit reminds me of my uncle, but my shirt was already sticking to my back with sweat. I rounded the corner behind the bar and a hand came from nowhere and slapped my ant farm to the ground, and two hands grabbed my shirt from behind, ripping the seams along my neckline and pulling me to the ground. The plastic ant farm clattered to the ground. Thankfully, it did not break, but it skidded towards the foot of Steve Jenkins. He and one of his sidekicks stood before me, smiling toothy smiles. Steve's buddy stood next to him. He was only known as Finger. He was shorter than Steve, but stocky. He got the name because he would bend kids' fingers back until they'd give up their lunch money. One year, he was bending one kid's finger back, but when the kid wouldn't give up his lunch money, he broke it. You could hear the wet snap and the scream shortly after throughout the whole playground. Somehow he didn't get into too much trouble from that. I think all the kids were too afraid of him to tell on him. Even the kid who had his finger broken was afraid he would come after him to break the other 9 fingers. "What do we have here?" Steve said. He had a beer in his hand. He must have stolen from the back of the bar. He threw the can, missing my head by inches. "It's second-hand Timmy. Whose clothes are you wearing today?" Both laughing. "Hey, Finger, I think this nerd needs you to do what you do best. Why didn't you bust one of his fingers?" Again, more laughing. Finger advanced and grabbed my hand. Damn, he was strong. He wrapped his hand around my index finger and started to bend it back. The pain was excruciating. I could feel the tendons and ligaments stretch. He was not going to stop. I closed my eyes, waiting for a sickening snap, but then he let go. I noticed that Steve had picked up the ant farm and was shaking it. "Hey, check it out. That nerd has an ant farm," Steve exclaimed. "No, please don't hurt them," I desperately pleaded. I honestly would rather have Finger break my index finger than have Tiny hurt or killed. My pleading made both of them smile widely, having found something I valued so deeply they could destroy so easily. Steve raised the ant farm above my head, ready to slam it as hard as he could to the concrete, surely destroying it and killing everything inside it. And then he froze and batted something from his ear. "Ouch! Something bit me!" Beside them, from under a dumpster, a thick river of writhing black ants flowed. The trail must have been a foot wide. The ants engulfed both Steve and Finger's feet, tearing through shoe leather and roping their ways up their legs. Surprise and terror struck across their face. A black stream of ants flowed up Steve's chest to the arm now holding the ant farm and encircled his forearm. The air filled with the moist clatter of mandibles. The arm bent slowly at a sickening, awkward angle and then fell completely off, amputated at the elbow. Steve's face contorted into a mask of fear and pain. The ant farm containing Tiny also fell to the ground, but landed on a mound made of a heaping pile of ants, which cushioned the fall. A high screech formed in both the boys' throats, but a dagger of ants had already eaten their way through their chest cavities, and ants and bits of lung tissue were the only things to issue forth from the now gurgling throats. They both collapsed into a mix of heaped up human parts, being quickly parceled into nutritious bits for the colony. A two-way traffic now forming as the bodies of the assailants quickly disappeared under the dumpster. Through an opening in a brick wall of the trough, and down into what must now be a massive and complex maze of subterranean passages that may stretch for miles from my house. The last of the ants retreated, leaving clean, dry pavement, not a droplet of blood behind, and the ant farm sitting perfectly upright on the concrete road as if nothing had happened at all. Tap, tap, tap. Tiny sat in the ant farm cleaning his mandibles. I picked up my ant farm and my library book and walked the rest of the way home, softly whistling a little tune. I opened the door to the house and went upstairs to my room to read my new library book. Later, my mom was home and made a rare home-cooked dinner as evening news came on. "Oh, how terrible," she exclaimed. "2 boys are missing. I think they went to your school." I knew they would not be found. The news then went on to remark about keeping your cats and dogs in the house, as many have gone missing due possibly to coyote activity in the area, although there have not been any coyote sightings for many weeks. Strange. As the years have gone by, I told Todd, I've learned a rudimentary form of communication that I can use to direct Tiny to, in turn, direct the colony. And yes, you are correct, Todd. My ascent in this company was more than luck. My colony is able quite easily to identify and locate large deposits of oil and minerals. Where the best geologists would fail, I would succeed. Heck, if I wanted to find and disable a nuclear silo, I could at the tap of a finger. Nothing is really outside my grasp, Todd. And of course, as you pointed out, no one person is outside my grasp either. I stood up and reached over and took Todd's glass from him. I took a sip of the woody, sweet scotch and placed the glass on my desk. I never liked drinking after seeing what it did to my uncle. "Lately, Todd," I said aloud, "I have been thinking about politics. That is, of course, after I settle into your job and become exceedingly rich from it. Think of how my particular skill set will come in handy." I looked down at Todd Windsor. Bands of ants had already started encircling his body, his eyelids now being cut from his face, exposing wide, bulging, bloodshot eyes brimming with fear and pain. No screaming issued from his mouth, however, as it was packed with ants already deconstructing his tongue and jaw. A gurgling sound issued from a hole in his chest where thousands of ants with their moist chatter are tearing his organs, bones, and muscles apart. Todd's head cocked to one side as a black, writhing mass of ants efficiently worked on his neck. His head then fell into his lap and rolled to the ground. The rest of his body was quickly being covered with mounds of writhing, excited black ants. Tiny, sitting on the seat back, overseeing the operation, tapping once in a while like an orchestra director. Tomorrow, there will be a company-wide announcement that Todd Winston is missing, and I will be announced the interim president of Mountain Oil and Gas. The investigation of his disappearance will examine many possibilities and suspects, especially his wife, but will demonstrate no foul play. Not that there won't be rumors, of course. In the morning, when I arrive to my office with a coffee in hand and a newspaper under my arm, the carpet and chair will be perfectly clean and dry as if professionally cleaned. There's still some wet clicking noise as the colony finishes up the last of Todd. As I turn off the office light, I softly close the door behind me as I leave the office, and I give it 3 taps to let Tiny know how much I appreciate him and the rest of my family.
Thank you, brave listeners, for joining me today. Please join me again next week for another frightening tale, or listen to one of more than 100 previous episodes. If you enjoyed your time here, please support my work. If you've been watching on YouTube, like the episode and subscribe to the channel. If you've been tuned in on Apple Podcast, please rate the channel as you see fit. And if you've been listening to the program on Spotify, I'd love to hear your comments. Most of all, share frightening tales with those around you and support today's authors however you can. Until next time, when I share with you another frightening tale, listen if you're brave enough.